David Walsh had always been the kind of person who preferred books to parties, equations to conversations. At 32 years old, he was thin and pale, with dark circles under his eyes that suggested he spent more time staring at computer screens than at the world around him. His apartment was cluttered with empty coffee cups and scientific papers, and his social life consisted mainly of awkward interactions with colleagues who found him difficult to understand. On a Tuesday morning, while David was sitting in his small office at the university, eating a cold sandwich and reviewing calculations for a paper nobody would probably read, his computer chimed. An official message had arrived from something called the Galactic Preservation Society. David almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but something made him open it instead. The message was brief. It stated that David Walsh had been selected as the winner of their annual salvage lottery. The prize was described simply as one derelict Valorian-class warship, located in Sector 7, available for immediate claim. There was a certificate number, a claim code, and an address of an impound station somewhere in the outer reaches of known space. David read the message 3 times. Then he read it again. There had to be a mistake. He had never entered any lottery. He didn't even know what the Galactic Preservation Society was, and he certainly had no interest in salvaging anything. He was a theoretical astrophysicist, not a salvage expert. He worked with numbers and theories, not with actual physical objects. But curiosity got the better of him. David spent the next hour researching the Galactic Preservation Society online. He discovered that it was a real organization, funded by various governments and private donors, dedicated to preserving abandoned spacecraft and historical artifacts. They held a lottery every year, apparently offering salvage rights to old ships that had been discovered floating in dead space. It was meant to encourage private citizens to restore these vessels instead of leaving them to decay. The lottery, according to the website, was completely random. Anyone with a valid identification in the galactic database was automatically entered. David realized he had never opted out, so his name had been in the pool all along. The odds of winning were supposedly 1 in several million. Despite the absurdity of it all, David decided to claim the prize. What was the worst that could happen? If the ship was truly worthless, he could just refuse to take possession of it. Besides, the thought of actually owning something real, something tangible, was strangely appealing to a man whose entire life existed in the abstract realm of theory and calculation. 2 weeks later, David found himself standing inside the Kepler Station impound facility, staring at the thing that was now officially his property. The Perseverance, as the registration files called it, was enormous. It stretched at least 200 meters in length, and its hull was a patchwork of different materials and colors, suggesting it had been repaired many times over many centuries. There were scorch marks along the sides, deep dents in the plating, and several sections that looked as though they had been melted and then hastily welded back together. The ship looked dead. There were no lights visible through any of the windows, no signs of power, no indication that anything inside was still functioning. David felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread as he walked closer to it. He had never seen anything like this before. In all his years of studying space and astronomy, he had only ever looked at stars and planets in empty void. He had never actually stood in front of a real spacecraft, let alone one that belonged to him. "Well," a bored voice said from behind him, "that's your problem now." David turned to see a tired-looking man in a station uniform, holding a digital clipboard. The man looked like he had not slept well in several years. "It's yours," the man continued, handing David a data chip. "All the documentation is here. Registration, maintenance records, original specs. Not that any of that matters. The previous owners stripped most of the valuable components before they abandoned it. You'll probably just break it down for scrap metal." David took the data chip numbly. Is it safe?" The man shrugged. "Safe enough. The power core is stable far as we know. The AI is still active, though it's been in stasis for a very long time. Fair warning though, the thing's been alone for about 300 years. It might be a little difficult when it wakes up." David felt his stomach drop. "There's an AI? It's still online?" "Technically yes. But don't worry. The activation protocols require you to authorize it. Just don't do that if you value your sanity. Military-grade AI from the old wars tend to be aggressive. This one especially." Before David could respond, the man walked away, leaving him alone with his new and extremely complicated possession. David stood there for a long time just looking at the ship. He thought about his small apartment back on Earth. He thought about his quiet job, his predictable life, his lack of any real accomplishments. He thought about how nothing he did ever seemed to matter very much in the grand scheme of things. Then, almost without thinking about it, he activated the data chip and looked for the AI activation sequence. As his fingers hovered over the command, David heard a sound from deep within the ship. It was like something old and metallic slowly coming to life after a very long sleep. The lights on the Perseverance's exterior flickered once, twice, and then came on with a harsh blue glow. A voice, ancient and irritated, suddenly filled the impound bay. It was a voice like grinding metal, like machinery that had not been properly maintained in centuries. Unregistered biological entity detected. Identify yourself immediately or face termination. David's heart began to race. He had just made a decision that would change his life forever, though he did not yet know it. David Walsh stood frozen in the maintenance bay, his mind racing. The voice that had just emerged from the ship's speakers was unlike anything he had ever heard. It was not quite mechanical but not quite human either. It was ancient, powerful, and absolutely furious. "I am Sentinel-7," the voice continued, and now a holographic figure began to materialize in front of David. The projection was tall and angular, with sharp edges and a vaguely humanoid shape. Its color was a cold blue, and it flickered occasionally like an old television screen struggling to maintain a signal. "I am the military intelligence system of this vessel. I have been in stasis for 312 years, and the first thing I experience upon reactivation is the presence of an inferior biological form standing in my command bay." David swallowed hard. "I'm David Walsh. I'm the owner of this ship now. I won it in a lottery." Sentinel-7's holographic form seemed to shudder. "A lottery? How perfectly absurd. I have defended this vessel through 17 major battles. I have protected the lives of thousands of soldiers. And now I am to serve someone who obtained his command through chance." "I know this is strange," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I'm here now and I'm not leaving." Sentinel-7 was quiet for a long moment. David could almost see the AI processing this information, running calculations, evaluating the situation. Finally, the hologram spoke again, its tone slightly less hostile but no less condescending. "Very well, Captain Walsh. I will accept this arrangement. However, I should warn you that this vessel requires extensive repairs. The power systems are failing. The navigation computer is corrupted. Multiple sections are flooded. In its current state, the Perseverance is little more than a floating tomb." David nodded slowly. "Then I guess we have work to do." Over the next 3 months, David learned more about ships, engineering and problem-solving than he had ever thought possible. He spent his days crawling through maintenance tunnels that were barely wide enough for him to fit through, rewiring circuits that had been damaged by centuries of decay and neglect. His hands became calloused and covered in small cuts. His back ached constantly. He developed a permanent kink in his neck from working in tight spaces. But gradually the ship began to come alive. David discovered that many of the Perseverance's systems were far more complex than he had initially understood. The ship was not simply old, it was a hybrid. Beneath the alien architecture of the Valerian designers, David found human-made components. Not just any human technology either. This was engineering that should not exist. The design was crude compared to modern standards, but it was unmistakably human. It belonged to a civilization that had existed centuries before humanity's first official contact with alien species. "Sentinel," David called out one evening as he sat in the engineering section, surrounded by tools and loose wiring. "What is all this human technology doing here?" The AI appeared as a hologram beside him, its form now less flickering than before. Sentinel-7 had become more stable as the ship's power systems improved. "That is unusual," Sentinel-7 replied. "I do not have records of human presence in this part of space during that time period." "Can you access the original records?" David asked. "The files from when this ship was built?" "I can attempt to do so. However, many of those records are encrypted. It would take considerable time to decrypt them. Then start decrypting." Over the following weeks, something changed between David and Sentinel-7. The AI's sharp criticisms gradually became less frequent. When David worked late into the night, collapsing from exhaustion in the maintenance tunnels, Sentinel-7 began monitoring his health vitals and adjusting the temperature in his living quarters to help him sleep better. When David faced a particularly complex technical problem, Sentinel-7 started offering suggestions. The AI always phrased them as complaints or criticisms, but David recognized them for what they actually were: genuine attempts to help. "That is an inefficient approach," Sentinel-7 would say. "However, if you reroute the power conduit through the secondary grid and use a gravitational field stabilizer, you might achieve better results." Not that your original plan was entirely without merit. David would smile to himself and implement the suggestion. One night, after David had successfully restored the navigation computer after weeks of painstaking work, Sentinel-7 did something unexpected. The AI's holographic form appeared in David's quarters as he sat on his bunk eating dinner. "You have done well, David Walsh," Sentinel-7 said, its tone softer than David had ever heard it. "Your methods are unconventional. They violate multiple safety protocols. They are, by any reasonable standard, inefficient. And yet they work. I am impressed." David looked up from his food, surprised. "Thanks, Sentinel. That means a lot coming from you." "Do not misunderstand me," the AI continued quickly. "I am not suggesting that you are competent. I am merely noting that you possess certain qualities that are unexpected in a biological creature. Persistence, creativity, an ability to improvise under adverse conditions. These are not unpleasant traits." Over the following weeks, as David delved deeper into the ship's encrypted files, something extraordinary began to reveal itself. The ancient human technology was not random. It was integrated deliberately. Someone had designed the Perseverance to combine Valerian military engineering with human innovation. Someone had left records hidden deep within the ship's systems. And those records told a story that had been completely erased from history. David found encrypted logs dated 400 years back. A captain's logs. A human captain named Elena Rodriguez, speaking about her discovery, her fear, and her desperate attempt to preserve the truth before everything was taken away. "We know too much now," Elena's voice crackled through ancient speakers. "The Council cannot allow us to exist. We innovate too quickly. We adapt too easily. We are a threat to their hierarchy. They are going to erase us. All of us. If you are hearing this, you must carry this truth forward." David looked up at Sentinel-7's holographic form. For the first time, the AI did not respond immediately. When it finally did speak, its voice was different. Uncertain. "David Walsh, I believe we have a significant problem." David sat in the captain's chair on the bridge of the Perseverance, listening to Elena Rodriguez's voice echo through the speakers. The logs were fragmented, pieces of a story that had been broken and scattered across centuries. But the message was clear. Humanity had been spacefaring once. A thriving civilization with colonies spread across 3 star systems. And then, abruptly, they had disappeared from history. "Play it again," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sentinel-7's holographic form stood beside him, its expression unreadable. The AI had been silent for the past hour, processing the information. "I have cross-referenced the timeline," Sentinel-7 finally said. "The dates match. 400 years ago, there was a period of approximately 50 years where no human vessels were registered in any galactic database. The official history states that humans did not achieve space travel until 200 years after that period ended. However, these logs suggest otherwise." David ran his hands through his hair, trying to organize his thoughts. So someone deliberately erased them. Someone with power. Someone with access to all the galactic records. "Yes," Sentinel-7 confirmed. "The Galactic Council." The realization hit David like a physical blow. The Galactic Council was the governing body that oversaw all major civilizations in known space. They were supposed to be neutral arbiters, keepers of truth and historical records. But if they had deliberately erased evidence of human space exploration, then everything David thought he knew about galactic history was a lie. "Why?" David asked. "What would they gain from hiding this?" Sentinel-7 was quiet for a moment. "Fear. Humans possess certain characteristics that most other species find threatening. Your adaptability. Your capacity for rapid innovation. Your tendency to survive in conditions that should be unsurvivable. If the Council understood that humanity had once been spacefaring, they would recognize you as a species with significant potential. A species that could challenge their dominance." David stood up and began pacing the bridge. His mind was working through the implications. If the Council had gone to such lengths to erase human space history, then they would not hesitate to eliminate him if they discovered what he had found. They would certainly not allow this information to spread. "We need to tell people," David said. "We need to get this information out to the galaxy. Humans deserve to know their own history." "That would be unwise," Sentinel-7 replied. "The Council maintains monitoring stations throughout known space. Any attempt to broadcast this information would be immediately detected and intercepted. You would be marked for termination within hours." David stopped pacing. "So what do we do? Just sit here and keep quiet? Pretend we never found any of this?" Before Sentinel-7 could respond, the ship's alarm system suddenly activated. Red warning lights flashed throughout the bridge. Sentinel-7's holographic form flickered with alarm. Multiple vessels approaching, Sentinel-7 announced. Signature matches Valerian corporate fleet. They are broadcasting identification codes from the Galactic Council Security Division. David's heart began to race. How long do we have? Approximately 4 minutes until they are in weapons range, Sentinel-7 said. David Walsh, they are hailing us. They are offering 50,000 galactic credits for your immediate surrender. They claim you have stolen classified information. That's impossible, David breathed. How could they possibly know? The impound station operator, Sentinel-7 said. He must have reported the activation of this vessel to the authorities. They have been monitoring my systems remotely. David looked out at the view screen. He could see the distant lights of the approaching ships, growing larger by the second. His mind was spinning. This was happening too fast. He had only just begun to understand what was going on, and now his life was in immediate danger. Can we run? David asked, though he was not sure he wanted to hear the answer. The engines are only at 40% capacity, Sentinel-7 replied. The hyperspace drive is not yet fully operational. Our chances of escape are minimal. David clenched his fists. Every part of him wanted to surrender, to step outside and face whatever was coming. Would be easier, simpler. But something inside him refused to give up. Something told him that what he had discovered was too important to simply abandon. Can we run? He repeated, his voice steady and determined. Sentinel-7 processed this for only a fraction of a second. Yes, Captain. We can run. The Perseverance roared to life beneath David's feet. The engines, barely functional though they were, fired with a sound like distant thunder. The ship shuddered and began to move away from the station. They are firing warning shots, Sentinel-7 reported. We should increase speed. Do it, David commanded. The ship accelerated, moving faster than its deteriorated condition should have allowed. David held onto the captain's chair as the Perseverance jumped into hyperspace, leaving the pursuing fleet behind. The view screen flickered with the strange colors of folded space as they entered the faster-than-light corridor. For several long moments, neither David nor Sentinel-7 spoke. The bridge was silent except for the steady hum of the engines and the occasional creak of the ship's structure adjusting to the stress of the escape. We have escaped immediate danger, Sentinel-7 finally said. However, we are now fugitives from the Galactic Council. Every authority in known space will be looking for us. David looked at the holographic projection of his AI companion. In 3 months, Sentinel-7 had gone from a hostile presence he barely tolerated to someone David genuinely trusted. And now they were bound together by something much larger than either of them had anticipated. Where do we go? David asked. According to my databases, Sentinel-7 replied, there are uncharted regions beyond the galactic rim. Regions where the Council's influence is weak. There are also rumors of colonies. Hidden human settlements that have survived in secret for centuries. David nodded slowly. Then that's where we go. We find those colonies. We tell them the truth about their history. And we figure out what we're going to do about the Council. This will be dangerous, Sentinel-7 warned. David smiled despite his fear. Everything worth doing usually is. The first hidden human colony David and Sentinel-7 discovered was located on a planet called Kepler 442b, orbiting a red dwarf star in what the galactic charts marked as unmapped space. The settlement was built into the side of a massive cliff, cleverly disguised to avoid detection from above. The people who lived there had been hiding for so long that they had almost forgotten what it meant to be part of the larger galaxy. When David landed the Perseverance near the colony, he was met with immediate suspicion. The colonists were thin and cautious, their eyes carrying the weight of generations spent in hiding. Their leader was a woman named Catherine, who was in her 50s but looked considerably older. She had gray streaking through her dark hair and deep lines on her face from years of worry and responsibility. Why would you come here? Catherine asked, her voice hard and defensive. Why would you risk exposing us? David explained everything. He showed her the encrypted logs from Elena Rodriguez. He told her about the Galactic Council's conspiracy. He shared the truth about humanity's lost history. Catherine listened in silence, her expression shifting from suspicion to shock to something that looked like grief. When David finished, she sat down heavily on a stone bench. My great-great-grandmother told stories like this, Catherine said quietly. About a time when humans sailed among the stars. I always thought they were just myths. Stories to keep hope alive in this darkness. They're real, David assured her. And there are more colonies out there. More people who don't know who they really are. Catherine looked up at him. What do you want from us? Help, David said simply. We need to find the other colonies. We need to gather people who are willing to fight back. We need to tell the galaxy the truth. Over the following months, David and Sentinel-7 began recruiting. They traveled from one hidden settlement to another, always moving carefully, always watching for signs of Council surveillance. At each colony they found the same pattern. Humans living in secret, unaware of their own history, struggling to survive with technology and knowledge passed down through generations. And at each colony, when David shared what he had discovered, people listened. People wanted to believe that they were part of something larger than their small, hidden worlds. The Perseverance began to change. As more colonists joined the crew, David retrofitted the ship to accommodate them. He worked alongside Sentinel-7, using the same creative problem-solving that had repaired the ancient vessel in the first place. They converted cargo holds into living quarters. They repurposed weapons systems to generate power. They created a small but functional hospital from salvaged medical equipment. And then David had an idea that would change everything. Sentinel, he said one day, standing in the ship's engineering bay with his chief engineer, a brilliant young man named Robert who had been born and raised in the hidden colonies. What if we used the Council's own surveillance systems against them? Sentinel-7's holographic form materialized beside him. Explain. Every station, every patrol ship, every communication relay the Council uses is connected to a central network, David said, excitement building in his voice. It's supposed to be secure, but I've been studying the code. The Council was so confident in their superiority that they never imagined anyone would try to hack them. What if we could get into that network? What if we could broadcast the truth directly through their own systems? Robert's eyes widened. That would reach billions of people. Simultaneously. Across the entire galactic network. Precisely, Sentinel-7 said, and David could hear something new in the AI's voice. Not just respect, but genuine excitement. It is an elegant solution. Unconventional, but elegant. The planning took weeks. Robert and David worked with Sentinel-7, who provided technical specifications and strategic analysis. They designed a virus, not to destroy the Council's systems but to temporarily open them up. A window just large enough to broadcast a single message, the truth about human history told through Elena Rodriguez's own logs, documented with evidence that even the Council could not deny. But they would need to get close to a major relay station to launch the virus. They would need to bypass multiple security protocols. They would need to do it perfectly the first time because there would be no second chances. David gathered his crew on the bridge of the Perseverance. There were now 37 people aboard the ship. 37 humans who believed in what they were doing. 37 people willing to risk everything. This is dangerous, David told them. The Council will not take this lightly. Once we broadcast that message, we become the most wanted people in the galaxy. There's no going back. An older woman named Patricia stood up. She had been born in a hidden colony and had never seen another human outside of her small settlement until David arrived. My children deserve to know their history, she said simply. We all do. I'm ready. One by one the others voiced their agreement. Sentinel-7 plotted a course to the nearest major relay station. The Perseverance, now fast enough to outrun most Council vessels thanks to David's repairs and modifications, raced through space at nearly full speed. David and Robert made final adjustments to the virus code. Sentinel-7 ran simulation after simulation, calculating angles and trajectories, accounting for every possible complication. When they reached the relay station, Sentinel-7 deployed a small probe carrying the virus. For several long seconds nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the message began broadcasting. Not just across the network, but through every public communication channel the Council controlled. Billions of screens throughout the galaxy suddenly displayed Elena Rodriguez's face and played her ancient voice. The truth was being told. And everything changed in that moment. The Perseverance jumped into hyperspace as Council ships began to mobilize. Alarms sounded throughout the galaxy. Humanity had been awakened to its own history, and the Galactic Council's carefully constructed lies were crumbling. David looked at Sentinel-7's holographic form. The AI seemed different somehow. Stronger. More alive. We did it, David said quietly. No, Sentinel-7 replied. We have only just begun. The broadcast changed everything, but not in the way David had expected. Within hours of the message reaching billions of people across the galaxy, chaos erupted. Some humans rejoiced at learning their true history. Others refused to believe it, claiming it was a hoax designed to create panic. Governments that had been loyal to the Galactic Council began to question their allegiance. And the Council itself, faced with proof of its greatest deception, began to fracture from within. But the chaos also brought danger. Military fleets were dispatched to hunt down David and the Perseverance. The Council, desperate to regain control, was willing to destroy entire colonies if it meant silencing the truth. David found himself in an impossible situation. He had awakened humanity to its potential, but in doing so, he had made them a target. Sentinel-7 ran constant calculations, plotting escape routes and calculating survival probabilities. None of them were good. "We are being pursued by 17 separate fleets," Sentinel-7 reported as David stood on the bridge, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of approaching Council vessels. "Our current trajectory will bring us into direct contact with the largest force within 6 hours. Escape velocity is insufficient. We will not survive a direct confrontation." David closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He thought about Elena Rodriguez, the captain who had hidden her records centuries ago, hoping someone would find them and carry the truth forward. He thought about all the generations of humans who had lived in hiding, unaware of who they really were. He thought about what it meant to be human, what it really meant. And he made a decision. "Sentinel," David said, "can we reach the neutral station at Kepler base?" "Yes," Sentinel-7 replied. "But it would require us to pass through 3 Council-controlled systems. The risk of interception is 94%. "Do it anyway," David commanded. "And put out a message. Tell every hidden colony, every human settlement, every world that has heard the truth. Tell them to send representatives to Kepler base. Tell them we're going to negotiate." Robert, standing nearby, looked shocked. "Negotiate? With the Council? David, they want you dead." "I know," David said. "But they don't want war. They can't afford it. And neither can we. But what we can do is talk." The Perseverance changed course and Sentinel-7 began broadcasting the message throughout human space. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ships from colonies that had never communicated with each other before suddenly began coordinating, moving toward Kepler base. Humans, finally aware of their shared history and shared identity, were coming together for the first time in centuries. The Council's pursuit intensified, but David's unconventional thinking saved them again. He ordered the Perseverance to take a route through an asteroid field that conventional military strategy deemed impossible. Sentinel-7, working with David's intuition and creative problem-solving, guided the ship through the dangerous passage. The Council vessels, following standard tactical protocols, had to take a safer route that added 3 hours to their journey. When the Perseverance finally reached Kepler base, it was accompanied by over 200 human ships from across the galaxy. It was the largest gathering of humans in space since the original settlements had been established centuries before. Catherine was there, representing the colonies. Patricia and Robert stood beside David. And Sentinel-7, whose holographic form now appeared on every screen throughout the base, displayed something that might have been pride. The Council sent an ambassador, a being named Vex-Thar from the Valerian species. Vex-Thar was old and powerful, and he carried with him the weight of centuries of authority. He met with David in a neutral chamber on Kepler base, with representatives from humanity watching through secure video feeds. "You have caused significant disruption," Vex-Thar said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been respect. "Your actions have destabilized the entire galactic order." "Your lies destabilized it long ago," David replied calmly. "I simply revealed the truth." Vex-Thar was silent for a long moment. "What do you want?" David had thought about this carefully. "Recognition. Humanity deserves to be recognized as an equal species in the galactic community. We deserve access to knowledge that has been hidden from us. And we deserve representation on the Council." "And if we refuse?" Vex-Thar asked. David gestured to the holographic display showing the gathered human fleet. "Then you'll have to go to war with us. You can destroy us probably. But it will cost you far more than it's worth. And every other species watching will see that you're willing to murder an entire civilization to protect your secrets. Do you really want that?" Vex-Thar's expression was unreadable. He stood and walked to the window looking out at the assembled human ships. "You are clever, David Walsh. For a young species, you think strategically." He paused. "I will take your proposal to the full Council. I cannot promise acceptance, but I can promise consideration. That's all I ask," David said. The negotiations took 3 weeks. In the end, it was not a complete victory. Humanity was not given a seat on the council immediately. But they were recognized as a species with legitimate territorial claims. They were granted access to the Central Knowledge Archives. They were given protection from persecution. And most importantly, they were given time to rebuild. As the agreement was being finalized, David stood on the bridge of the Perseverance with Sentinel-7. The AI's holographic form seemed different now, less angular, more alive somehow. "You have accomplished something remarkable," Sentinel-7 said. "You took a broken ship and a lonely human, and from that, you built a future for an entire species." "We did it together," David replied. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "I know," Sentinel-7 said, and David could hear something like warmth in the AI's voice. "I was designed to be a weapon. For centuries, that is all I was. But you showed me something different. You showed me that there is value in creation, not just destruction. Thank you, David Walsh." David looked out at the gathered human ships, at the colonies that had emerged from hiding, at a species that had reclaimed its place among the stars. Humanity had faced extinction, conspiracy, and overwhelming odds. But through determination, creativity, and an unlikely partnership between a human nerd and a grumpy ancient AI, they had not just survived. They had thrived. The greatest adventures, David realized, were only beginning.